Welcome, welcome, my friends. This is Mr. K's, and we're going to be talking about the Greek civilization. This is 5.1, and we're going to do some introductory notes today on Greece. And I will stop talking like a Greek. All right. Geography is going to be an important thing for the Greeks. They are in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean Sea area. And there's an old saying that the Greeks didn't live on the land, but they lived around the sea. What does that mean? Well, that means they depended on the sea for food and transportation more than anything. Yes, they did live on the land, of course, but they had their cities were pretty much on the coast, and they linked city to city. Now, because it wasn't an easy way to get from city to city on land, they depended on the ocean or the sea. Now, Greece, having very thin soil, didn't have a lot of timber, very little precious metals, and arable farmland. Arable means fertile or able to be farmed. If you look at this statistic, 75% or 3/4 of the land is mountainous. And because of that, it was hard to unite the people into a Greek nation. They were pretty much cities that did what they wanted to do. They were independent of each other. So about 20% of the land ends up being arable or fertile for crops. Their staple crops were grains that they were able to make bread out of, grapes to make wine and raisins, and olives to use for food, and olive oil for various things. The climate was warm, and so many Greeks lived outdoors. They spent most of their time outdoors, working, meeting friends, going to the market, etc., etc. I want to show you an example of the rockiness of the coast of Greece. An irregular coastline, so it was very good for fishing because the fish can hide in these nooks and crannies. It was fairly deep, so ships could sidle right up to the coast. So it was perfect for fishing. Okay, now the early Greeks were the Mycenaeans, Indo-European settlers from about 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago. Now, the Mycenaeans had a group of kings ruling over these cities. Each king had a city, and they dominated for roughly 400 years. They invaded the island of Crete that we saw in the previous chapters. And we see the Minoans are going to definitely influence these Mycenaeans or these Greeks. The Minoans become kind of like a mother culture for the Greeks. And the Mycenaeans are going to emphasize trading right on the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. In ancient times, there was the Trojan War. Supposedly, it was a 10-year war between the city-state of Troy and the city-states of Mycenae. The legend has it that a Mycenaean king's wife, Helen, was kidnapped by a Trojan youth, taken back to Troy, and this 10-year-long war was waged to get her back. Because Troy was impenetrable, the Mycenaeans finally tricked the Trojans. They made a wooden horse, which was a symbol of Troy, secretly put some soldiers in, and left it outside the walls of Troy. Then they pretended to sail away. They sailed around the coast, out of sight, and the Trojans brought this wooden horse in, believing that it would give them special powers if they had it right in their city. At night, as everybody was asleep, these soldiers opened the doors, and the Mycenaeans come rushing in and destroy the Trojans. Now, this was a legendary war. Was it true or not? Well, they finally found what they believed in the late 1800s is an excavation that was the foundations of Troy. Up to that time, they just thought it was a legend. So these early wars show you that there is not really necessarily all the time a united nation of Greece, but city-states might get together to wage war against a common enemy. Soon after the Trojan War was over, you have a group of ancient Greeks coming in called the Dorians, and they overthrow Mycenae about 3,200 years ago. Now, they aren't as advanced culturally as the Mycenaeans, and you have about 400 years where they didn't have any writing. It's like they forgot how to write. And the Trojan War is learned by the spoken word. Here we have a gentleman by the name of Homer. During the Doric period, he was a blind poet, and he composes these narrative poems called epics, celebrating the heroic deeds of heroes like Paris. And he tells the story about Ulysses going to the war, the Trojan Wars, and coming back. In it, he talks about the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad, fighting the war, the Odyssey, this long, long trip home. In it, he talks about monsters like the Cyclops and the Sirens that destroy ships by their singing. So we have a rich history here of narrative poems, but it's not written down until later on. The Greek heroic ideal of arete, virtue and excellence, was celebrated. Now, to talk about things scientific, that's not around yet. So mythology is going to be these traditional stories about the Greek gods, explaining the mysteries of nature. What we know is the natural science now, the mysteries of nature and the power of human passions, like love, lust, hatred, sacrifice, etc., etc. I give you an example of the change of seasons. How did the Greeks explain that? Well, it was the Greek gods that did this. If there was a lightning bolt that they saw, it must have been Zeus that's throwing a lightning bolt. Or the sea is riled up. Well, it's obviously the god of the sea, Poseidon, who is angry. Human qualities were given to the gods, as I said before: love, hatred, lust, jealousy, sacrifice, things like that. So we have a rich, rich history of these oral traditions and stories that are passed on to later generations. And the Romans are going to adopt the mythology of the Greeks. Well, this is Mr. K's with his Greek accent. I'll see you down the way. Opa!